The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet suburban neighborhood when the familiar hum of a garage door echoed across the street. It was the sort of sound most people never paid attention to, the everyday noise of life that blended into the background. But on this particular morning, it set off a chain of events that would throw the entire community into chaos. The homeowner had been living there for years, quietly minding his own business. He was not a loud neighbor, not one to cause unnecessary trouble, and certainly not someone who drew much attention. His house looked like all the others in the HOA-governed neighborhood. Tidy lawn, freshly painted shutters, the same model mailbox that had been mandated by the board. It was conformity at its finest, the hallmark of a tightly controlled community. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect suburban life, tension always lurked. The HOA board, dominated by a handful of self-important individuals, liked to throw their weight around, and among them was one figure who stood out more than anyone else: Karen. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, the kind of woman who patrolled the streets like she owned them, clipboard in hand, always searching for a violation to report. Karen thrived on confrontation. She lived for the moment she could call out someone for a perceived wrong, even if it was something trivial, like grass an inch too high or a garbage can left out an hour too long. Neighbors whispered about her constant meddling, but few dared to stand up to her. She wielded the HOA bylaws like a weapon, and she knew exactly how to manipulate them to her advantage. That morning, as the garage door rolled open, Karen was already outside. She had been walking her dog, a small, yapping terrier that seemed to share her personality, and she stopped in her tracks the moment she saw what was inside. Her eyes widened, and her mouth twisted into a familiar scowl. Inside the garage sat a car. Not just any car, but a gleaming, freshly detailed vehicle that looked brand new. Its polished paint reflected the morning light like a mirror, and its chrome details sparkled. To most people, it was simply a nice car sitting in a driveway where it belonged. But to Karen, it was something else entirely. She believed it was hers. Just days earlier, she had bragged to anyone who would listen about a new vehicle purchase. She spoke in vague terms, never revealing specifics, but she had gone on and on about how it was the perfect deal and how she had beat everyone else to it. Whether or not she had actually completed the purchase was a detail she glossed over. In Karen's mind, what she wanted was already hers, and seeing that car inside her neighbor's garage triggered something deep within her. She stormed forward, dragging her dog behind her, and began shouting accusations. To her, it was not possible that her neighbor could rightfully own that car. She convinced herself within seconds that he had somehow stolen it from her. Her voice carried through the neighborhood, shrill and piercing as she pointed and raged. The homeowner stood still, stunned by the scene unfolding. He had bought the car legitimately, saved for it, and worked hard to make it his. There was no theft, no trickery, nothing but paperwork, receipts, and a long trail of effort that made the car rightfully his. But trying to explain that to Karen was like shouting into the wind. She wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in control. When her shouting didn't get the reaction she wanted, Karen escalated. She pulled out her phone with the same theatrical flair she used whenever she wanted to assert dominance. Within seconds, she was on the line with 911, dramatically explaining that her neighbor had stolen her newly purchased car and hidden it in his garage. Her voice was laced with exaggerated distress, painting herself as the victim of a crime she had invented in her own head. As she paced the sidewalk, waving her free hand and making a spectacle, neighbors began to emerge from their homes. Curtains were pulled aside, doors opened, and sleepy faces peeked out to see what all the commotion was about. Some shook their heads, already weary of another Karen incident. Others leaned in with curiosity, drawn to the drama like moths to a flame. The homeowner could only stand there, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him as Karen spun her tale louder and louder. She described how she had just bought the car, how she had been about to bring it home, and how her neighbor had somehow snatched it away. The more she talked, the more elaborate her lies became, until it sounded like something out of a movie. For a moment, the homeowner considered shutting the garage door, walking back inside, and pretending none of it was happening. But he knew that would only fuel her claims further. Karen thrived on twisting reality, and if he disappeared from view, she would declare it proof of guilt. Instead, he stood his ground, silent and calm, letting her words hang in the air. He knew the truth would eventually reveal itself, but in the meantime, he had to endure the chaos of her performance. The neighbors' whispers grew louder, speculation spreading like wildfire. Some sided with him, rolling their eyes at Karen's antics. Others, unfamiliar with the details, wondered if there could be any truth to her accusations. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens cut through the morning air. Karen straightened with satisfaction, a smug smile curling across her lips as she announced to anyone within earshot that the police were on their way to deal with the thief. She tugged her dog's leash and planted herself firmly in the middle of the street, blocking the view of the garage like a guard protecting what she believed was hers. The homeowner felt his stomach sink. He had nothing to hide but the thought of officers arriving to investigate a false claim was still unnerving. He imagined the awkward explanations, the paperwork, the wasted time, and the stain of suspicion that Karen was determined to smear on him, and as the sirens grew louder, echoing, closer with each second, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was locked on the house, every whisper silenced, as the flashing lights finally came into view. The stage was set for a confrontation that would push the already fragile balance of the neighborhood to the breaking point. The garage door was still open, the car still gleaming in the morning light, and Karen was still shrieking about theft when the police cruisers pulled up to the curb. The real drama was only just beginning. The sound of sirens finally faded as two police cruisers rolled to a stop at the curb. Their flashing lights cast blue and red patterns across the pristine lawns, illuminating the scene like a stage performance. Neighbors clustered on sidewalks and driveways, whispering with anticipation as if they were spectators at some impromptu neighborhood theater. Everyone knew Karen well, and everyone knew this was not going to be simple. Karen wasted no time rushing forward, waving her arms with exaggerated urgency. Her dog barked furiously at the officers as she pulled at its leash, thrusting her phone in the air like it was evidence of a crime. Her voice rang out, carrying across the quiet streets as she launched into her frantic version of events. She declared herself the victim, insisting that her neighbor had stolen the car that now gleamed inside the open garage. The officers, practiced in the art of listening without reacting, let her ramble. They nodded politely, jotting notes, though it was clear from the way their eyes flicked toward the homeowner and the car that they were already questioning the believability of her story. Karen, however, was too far gone in her own performance to notice. She pointed at the homeowner with a finger so sharp and accusatory it might as well have been a weapon. The homeowner remained still. He knew the best thing he could do was keep calm. Karen wanted him to lash out, to argue, to fuel her narrative of victimhood. But instead, he kept his hands visible, his posture steady, and his demeanor unshaken. When the officers approached, he greeted them with quiet composure, standing beside the car that had sparked so much chaos. The questions began. The officers asked how he had acquired the car, whether he had proof of ownership, whether he understood the accusations being made. He responded carefully, providing simple, factual answers. He explained that he had purchased the vehicle from a local dealership just days earlier, completed all the paperwork, and had the receipts to prove it. He even offered to retrieve the documents from inside his house. Karen, of course, interrupted at every turn. She stomped closer, shaking her head violently as she tried to shout down his words. She claimed he was lying, claimed the paperwork must have been forged, claimed that she had made a down payment herself, and that the dealership had somehow handed the car to the wrong person. The more she talked, the less sense her story made. Yet her conviction only grew stronger. The officers had seen this kind of behavior before. Someone so entrenched in their own narrative that reality bent to their will. They gave Karen space to speak, but their questions became more pointed. They asked for her proof of ownership, her documentation, her receipts. That was when her confidence faltered. She stammered, claiming the dealership was still processing the paperwork. She insisted that the sale had been finalized verbally, that she was promised the car, that the dealership must have made a mistake. She admitted she had nothing in writing to show them, only her word that the vehicle was hers. The officers exchanged a glance. It was the kind of look that spoke volumes, professional, restrained, but filled with silent understanding. They had been called to many scenes where truth and delusion collided, and this was quickly shaping up to be another one of those moments. Still, procedure had to be followed. They asked the homeowner once more to produce proof. Without hesitation, he disappeared inside and returned with a folder. Neatly organized within were the bill of sale, the financing documents, and the registration application. His name was printed clearly on every page, leaving no room for doubt. He even produced the keys, complete with dealership tags still attached. The officers studied the documents carefully. They radioed in details to confirm the VIN number-matched records at the DMV. Every check came back clean. The car was his, legally, indisputably, and beyond question. The truth, however, did nothing to calm Karen. If anything, it pushed her deeper into denial. She accused the homeowner of fraud, accused the dealership of conspiracy, even accused the police of siding against her because they didn't want to listen to a woman. Her voice cracked under the strain of her anger, and her words grew, more frantic by the second. By now, the neighbors were fully invested in the scene. Some recorded on their phones, capturing every detail for posterity. Others whispered loudly enough for Karen to hear, mocking her outbursts and shaking their heads. The spectacle was no longer just about a car. It was about the unraveling of the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. The officers gave Karen one last chance. They explained clearly that the paperwork proved ownership, that the car was not hers, and that continuing to make false claims could result in consequences. They told her to step back, to allow the situation to de-escalate. But Karen refused. She planted herself firmly in front of the car, blocking the officer's path as though she could physically stop reality from moving forward. Her dog barked, wildly, tugging at its leash as she shouted that she would not let her stolen property be driven away. It was a last-ditch effort, desperate and reckless, but it only cemented what everyone already knew. She was out of control. The officers had no choice. One of them stepped forward, gently but firmly moving her aside, warning her to calm down. When she resisted, when she shoved back and continued screaming, they pulled her further away, restraining her enough to restore order. The sight of Karen being escorted from the driveway sent murmurs rippling through the crowd of neighbors. The homeowner remained silent, watching as the chaos finally began to subside. He had been vindicated, his name cleared, his property protected. Yet the incident left a sour taste. The fact that Karen could so easily summon law enforcement over a fabricated story was unsettling. The fact that she could stir such chaos with nothing but her words was alarming, and he knew, deep down, that this was not the end. As the police guided Karen back toward the sidewalk, issuing their warnings and documenting the call, her eyes locked onto the homeowner. It was not the look of someone who had been proven wrong. It was the look of someone plotting their next move. Her humiliation was public, her credibility fractured, but her determination burned hotter than ever. She had lost the battle, but she was already preparing for war. The flashing lights faded as the cruisers began to leave. The neighbors slowly retreated into their homes, buzzing with gossip they would share for weeks to come. The homeowner closed his garage door, the car safe inside, but the weight of what had just unfolded lingered heavy in the air. This was not over. Karen would not let it be over, and as night fell on the quiet neighborhood, the stage was already being set for her next escalation. The days following the police confrontation were strangely quiet in the neighborhood. For the homeowner, it was a fragile calm, like the stillness that follows a thunderstorm, heavy with the knowledge that another strike of lightning might not be far away. He went about his daily routine cautiously, aware that Karen was still seething, plotting, and waiting for her opportunity to retaliate. At first, he noticed only small things. His mailbox flag bent slightly out of place. A scattering of trash blown onto his lawn, though it looked less like coincidence and more like deliberate placement. He told himself not to jump to conclusions, not to attribute everything to Karen, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. Each day brought a new irritation, subtle enough to be dismissed but consistent enough to suggest intent. Karen had always been the self-proclaimed enforcer of the HOA's rules, and now she had shifted her energy into a personal vendetta. No longer content to wait for real violations, she began manufacturing them. It started with notices taped to his door, brightly colored warnings claiming he was in violation of HOA standards. One accused him of failing to edge his lawn properly. Another alleged his garbage cans were visible for too long after pickup. Yet another warned him that the unauthorized vehicle in his garage was not approved for storage within the community. The homeowner knew these were baseless claims, empty threats printed on sheets of paper Karen had clearly drafted herself. They bore no official signature, no HOA letterhead, no validity whatsoever. But to a casual neighbor glancing at his door, they looked real enough. Karen's goal was not truth. It was perception. She wanted to smear his reputation, to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of others. The whispers returned, louder now. Neighbors speculated about what had happened with the police, about whether the car really was his, about why Karen seemed so determined to bring him down. Some believed him, their sympathy quietly expressed with knowing looks or small gestures of support. Others kept their distance, wary of being caught in the crossfire, and a few sided with Karen, convinced that where there was smoke, there must be fire. Karen thrived on that division. She escalated her tactics, standing at the end of his driveway with her dog, staring him down whenever he left or returned home. She made calls to the HOA board, demanding action, claiming that his car lowered property values, that his behavior threatened community harmony, that he was a disruptive influence. She lobbied for fines, for hearings, for anything that would strip him of his peace. And when the board hesitated, aware of her reputation but unwilling to confront her directly, she took matters into her own hands. One morning, he found her walking circles around his car, clipboard in hand, jotting notes as if she were conducting an inspection. She snapped photos without permission, crouched to record the license plate, and muttered loudly about documenting evidence. It was harassment in plain sight, but Karen masked it as civic duty. She wanted him to react, to lash out, to give her the excuse she needed to portray herself as the victim once more. But he didn't take the bait. He endured in silence even as the pressure mounted. Her persistence, however, only grew. She began spreading rumors beyond the neighborhood, cornering parents at local schools, speaking to clerks at nearby stores, telling anyone who would listen that her neighbor was a thief who had stolen her car. It was slander woven into every day. Conversation, spreading through the community like wildfire. Soon he noticed strangers giving him wary glances, subtle signs that Karen's poison was taking root. The car itself became the focal point of her obsession. When it wasn't in the garage, she followed it. Once, at the grocery store, he caught sight of her lurking in the parking lot, Her phone raised as she filmed him loading bags into the trunk. Another time, he spotted her car trailing his at a distance down a main road, always just far enough back to avoid confrontation. She was determined to catch him in some imagined wrongdoing, to build a case out of thin air. The homeowner's patience wore thin. He began documenting her actions, saving the false notices, recording her confrontations, gathering his own evidence. He knew it might be necessary one day, that Karen's obsession was spiraling beyond neighborly dispute into dangerous territory. But even as he prepared, he couldn't shake the unease, because Karen was not simply angry, she was humiliated. And humiliation fueled her like nothing else. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he heard scratching near his garage. He rushed outside to find Karen retreating quickly, her dog tugging her down the sidewalk. On closer inspection, he saw what she had done. Long, deliberate scratches marred the paint on the car's side panel. It wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was targeted, personal, unmistakable. His heart sank. The car he had worked so hard to buy, the car that symbolized his effort and independence, was now scarred by her spite. The damage was costly, but the deeper wound was psychological. This was no longer just about accusations, gossip, or petty notices. Karen had crossed into criminal territory. The police were called again. They arrived, took statements, examined the damage, and knocked on Karen's door. She denied everything, of course, her voice dripping with indignation, as she claimed she had been nowhere near his property, that he was fabricating stories to attack her. Without concrete evidence tying her to the act, the officers could do little beyond filing a report. Karen smiled smugly as the police left, standing on her porch with the air of someone untouchable. She knew she was walking the line, pushing just far enough to inflict pain without leaving proof, and she relished every second of it. The homeowner, however, now had a new resolve. Karen had declared war, and while he had tried to avoid conflict, he realized avoidance would no longer protect him. She would not stop until she was forced to. The battle lines had been drawn, and the next moves would determine who truly controlled the neighborhood. As night fell once again, the scratched car sat under the dim glow of a streetlight, a visible reminder of Karen's vendetta. The quiet of the neighborhood felt heavy, oppressive, as if the houses themselves were holding their breath for what would come next. The homeowner knew one thing with certainty. Karen wasn't finished, and neither was he. The morning after the scratches appeared on the car, the homeowner stood in his driveway, staring at the deep gouges glinting under the sun. The damage wasn't just cosmetic, it was symbolic. Karen had crossed a line, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of her vendetta pressing down on him. She wasn't just trying to humiliate him anymore. She wanted to break him, to force him out of the neighborhood entirely, but instead of giving her what she wanted, he decided to turn the tide. The days of passive endurance were over. He began by gathering every piece of evidence he had quietly collected over the past weeks. The phony notices taped to his door, the recordings of her standing in his driveway taking photos, the timestamps of her car following him through town. Everything was meticulously organized into folders. He even added the police report about the vandalism to his car, strengthening the pattern of harassment she had built against herself. Then he reached out to the HOA board. He had avoided them until now, knowing how easily Karen manipulated their rules. But with documented proof, he finally had leverage. He sent a detailed email with attachments outlining the harassment, the false notices, and the baseless 911 call that had wasted police resources. He didn't ask them to intervene. He demanded accountability. If the HOA allowed Karen to weaponize her position against him, he warned, then they would all be complicit in her behavior. The board was shaken. Behind closed doors, members whispered about how far Karen had gone this time. Many had tolerated her antics for years, too afraid or apathetic to confront her, but her obsession with the car had pushed her into dangerous territory. Some feared lawsuits. Others feared the reputation of the HOA collapsing under scrutiny. Though no official decision was made immediately, the seeds of doubt about Karen's leadership had been planted. Karen, however, had no idea her power was slipping. She strutted through the neighborhood as though she had already won, spreading more rumors, bragging about how she was handling the car thief, and even hinting that she would force the board to evict him. But the whispers no longer worked in her favor. Neighbors who once avoided choosing sides now started questioning her motives. Some began to quietly distance themselves from her, wary of being caught in the backlash. The homeowner, meanwhile, strengthened his defenses. He installed security cameras around his home, positioned to capture every angle of his driveway, garage, and yard. He added motion-activated lights, ensuring that if Karen tried anything again, there would be no denying it. This time, her actions would be caught on film. Karen noticed the changes immediately. Her morning walks became slower, her eyes scanning the new equipment with suspicion. The sight of cameras unnerved her, though she refused to show it. Instead, she muttered to passing neighbors that the homeowner was spying on the community, twisting his precautions into another accusation. But her words carried less weight now. People had grown tired of her constant stories, tired of the chaos that seemed to follow her everywhere, and then came the moment that shifted everything. Late one night, the homeowner's security cameras caught movement near his garage. When he checked the footage, there was no mistaking it. It was Karen. She crept along the driveway with a flashlight, her dog tugging on the leash beside her. She shined the beam directly onto the car, circling it like a predator stalking prey. At one point, she crouched low, pressing her face close to the windshield as if searching for some piece of evidence to justify her obsession. Then she reached into her bag. What she pulled out was a small object, sharp and metallic. The camera caught the glint as she raised it toward the car. But this time, before she could make her mark, the floodlights roared to life, bathing her in white light. She froze, caught like a deer in headlights, her face contorted in shock as she realized she was being recorded. Within seconds, she fled, dragging her barking dog down the sidewalk. The footage was undeniable. The homeowner saved it, backed it up, and prepared his next move. The following morning, he contacted the police once more, this time providing the video as evidence. Unlike before, when Karen's denial had shielded her from consequences, there was no escaping what the cameras had captured. The officers reviewed the tape, their expressions grim. Karen's antics had officially escalated into criminal mischief. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By midday, everyone seemed to know that Karen had been caught on camera attempting to vandalize the car again. The whispers turned into open conversations. Neighbors who once tiptoed around her now laughed openly at her downfall. Some even confronted her directly, demanding to know why she had lied and dragged the community into chaos. The HOA board could no longer ignore the problem. At an emergency meeting, members discussed the liability of allowing Karen to continue her reign of harassment. The police report, the video footage, and the mounting complaints from neighbors painted a damning picture. For the first time in years, Karen's grip on the HOA wavered. She, of course, tried to fight back. She claimed the footage was doctored, that the homeowner had staged the entire scene to frame her. She insisted she was merely walking her dog, that the object in her hand was nothing more than her house keys. But her words rang hollow. No one believed her anymore. The homeowner, meanwhile, felt the balance of power shift. For weeks, he had endured her torment, her false accusations, her attempts to control him. Now, with the truth exposed, he finally saw the cracks in her facade. Karen wasn't invincible. She wasn't untouchable. She was simply a bully who had gone too far, and her empire was beginning to collapse. Yet even as her reputation crumbled, Karen's eyes burned with a dangerous determination. She had been cornered, humiliated, and stripped of the control she once wielded so easily. And people like Karen didn't back down gracefully. They lashed out. The homeowner knew the fight wasn't over. The HOA board would meet again soon to decide her fate. The police investigation would move forward, and the neighborhood itself teetered on the edge of change. But one thing was certain. Karen would not go quietly, and as the sun set on another tense day, the homeowner braced himself for the final clash that everyone knew was coming. The HOA board meeting that night was unlike any the neighborhood had seen before. What was usually a dull gathering of homeowners discussing lawn maintenance and budget allocations had transformed into a charged event, packed with curious residents eager to witness the climax of the ongoing feud. Word of Karen's late-night antics and the damning video footage had spread like wildfire, and people arrived early to secure seats, buzzing with anticipation. Karen entered the room with her head held high, feigning confidence despite the weight of suspicion pressing down on her. She clutched her clipboard like a shield, her lips pursed into a thin line as if daring anyone to question her authority. But the whispers, the pointed stares, and the way people shifted away from her spoke. Louder than words, her control over the neighborhood had slipped, and everyone knew it. The homeowner sat quietly near the front, his demeanor calm but resolute. He had brought his folder of evidence with him, neatly organized, and the flash drive containing the video footage rested securely in his pocket. He wasn't there to create drama. He was there to end it once and for all. The board president, usually deferential to Karen's overbearing personality, opened the meeting with a strained tone. After quickly addressing minor agenda items, he cleared his throat and announced the main issue: allegations of harassment, vandalism, and misconduct by a member of the HOA. The room fell silent, the weight of the statement heavy with unspoken tension. Karen immediately launched into a defensive tirade. She claimed she was the victim of a smear campaign, that the homeowner had fabricated evidence, that he was manipulating the community against her. Her voice rose in pitch and volume as she gestured wildly, her dog yapping at her feet in chaotic harmony. But unlike before, her performance no longer commanded respect. Eyes rolled, heads shook, and neighbors whispered their disbelief. Then it was the homeowner's turn. He spoke calmly, methodically, laying out the timeline of events from the moment Karen had accused him of stealing the car to her repeated harassment and escalation. He presented the phony violation notices, the police reports, the records of her following him around town. Finally, he played the video on a projector, the grainy footage illuminating Karen's late-night attempt to vandalize the car. Gasps rippled through the crowd as her figure appeared on screen, crouched with the object in her hand, frozen like a criminal caught in the act. Karen's face paled. For a moment she stammered, searching for words, but the evidence spoke for itself. The room erupted in murmurs. Some neighbors openly laughed, others shook their heads in disbelief. Years of her self-appointed rule, years of her intimidation and meddling, all crumbled in an instant. The board had no choice. With the evidence presented, they voted swiftly. Karen was formally censured, stripped of any authority she once held in the HOA, and fined heavily for her harassment and attempted vandalism. The police investigation loomed over her as well, with officers already building a case that could bring further consequences. Her reign was over. But the true collapse came not from the board or the police. It came from her neighbors. The same. People she had lorded over for years now turned their backs on her. No one rallied to her defense. No one offered her sympathy. Instead, they whispered about her downfall, recording her tantrum on their phones as she shrieked about conspiracies and corruption. For the first time, Karen stood alone. The homeowner, meanwhile, felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The car, though scarred from her spite, remained his, a symbol of his perseverance. The neighborhood, though scarred from her tyranny, began to heal. In the days that followed, People who had once kept their distance approached him with quiet thanks, expressing relief that someone had finally stood up to Karen. A sense of community slowly returned, fragile but genuine. Karen, however, did not go quietly. In the weeks after the meeting, she tried to fight back with desperate measures: emails, rants on community forums, confrontations in the street. But each attempt only further isolated her. Without power, without credibility, her words became nothing more than background noise. Eventually, the for sale sign appeared on her lawn, standing tall and silent like the final admission of defeat. When the moving truck arrived months later, neighbors gathered discreetly to watch. Some smiled, others sighed in relief, but all shared the same thought: the neighborhood would finally be free of Karen. As the truck pulled away and her car disappeared down the street for the last time, an air of peace settled over the community. The homeowner stood in his driveway, the evening sun reflecting off his repaired car, and allowed himself a long breath of relief. The battle had been grueling, the stress heavy, but he had stood firm. He had faced lies, harassment, and even criminal acts, and in the end, truth had prevailed. Karen had called 911 when he opened his garage, screamed that he had stolen her car, and unleashed weeks of chaos upon his life. But in her relentless pursuit of control, she had destroyed herself. Her obsession had been her undoing, and her departure marked the end of an era the neighborhood would never forget. The story of Karen became legend, retold at block parties and whispered to new residents as a cautionary tale. Parents shook their heads. Children giggled at exaggerated imitations of her outbursts, and the phrase, "Don't go full Karen," became a neighborhood joke. The scars she left behind faded, replaced by laughter and unity, as if the community had been reforged through shared struggle. And the homeowner? He finally lived the quiet life he had always wanted. The car sat proudly in the garage, a reminder of the ordeal, but also of resilience. He no longer feared opening the garage door in the morning, no longer wondered what new chaos awaited. For the first time in a long time, he felt at home again. The drama was over, the queen of the HOA was dethroned, and peace, at last, returned to the block.